Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video we will build together Todo MVC project by using React hooks. And it might sound like a small project, but we will make it really scalable and reusable. So let's jump right into it. So here I open Todo MVC website, and if you don't know what is it is a project that is implemented in different languages. For example, here you can see a lot of different frameworks, and for example we have here React. As you can see on the right, this is how our project will work. So we have here an input, we can type something, hit enter, and here is our first to-do. Now we can create one more to-do, we can also toggle or untoggle all to-dos, we see the number of items on the bottom. If we check something, we can jump to active items or completed items, and of course all items. Also we have here inline editing and remove button. So actually there is quite a lot of functionality to implement. The first step to start this project is to generate it, and for this we will use Create React App. And if you don't know what it is, I already made a video on that, so I will link it here on the top. So as you can see here, I open github.com Create React App. And for us, important part here is what Node version do we need. And as you can see here, we need at least Node 10 version. So on your machine, you must install Node, for example, from the official website. As you can see here, we have two versions, 14 and 15. And I always recommend to use LTS version because it is more stable. So you just download it and install on your machine. If you don't have it, then in the console you can just write node -version. As you can see, I have already installed 14th version. So if node -version gives you some output like this, and it is bigger than 10, then you're good to go. Now the interesting part is how we can generate our Create React App. And if we will check here inside GitHub, Facebook, Create React App, there are a lot of possibilities. For example, with using npx or npm or yarn. You are getting npm out of the box together with Node. This is why it makes sense to use it. I will use for me yarn just because I have installed it on my machine and I prefer it more. But actually the output is completely the same. So the idea is that we have something that is called initializer. So for example for npm and yarn, this is React App. So this is the skeleton of our project that will be generated. For this, I will copy this line completely and jump to the console. But here is the small difference between your project and my folder here. As you can see, I already generated the project. So I have a folder, Monsterlessons Academy, and inside I don't have anything except of Git, so it is empty. But for you, you didn't create a project yet. This is why you must use this command, and inside folder where you will run it, it will generate for you my app folder. I don't want this approach, I want to generate a project inside already created folder. This is why I will use this command, yarn create react app, but here instead of my app, I will just say dot. And this dot means that I want to generate create react app in current folder. And if you don't have a folder, then you can use the default version where you are setting the name. For example, I think for us to do MVC name is really convenient. After hitting enter, as you can see, React installs all our dependencies and generates the project for us. Now, as you can see, everything is finished and we're getting message happy hacking and done, which means we can start to use this project. Now we need to start our web server, so I will jump to another tab and call yarn start. And this will start our Create React App. As you can see, I am now in localhost 3000 and this is how Create React App is looking like. Now let's clean it a little bit. So I will open here our files. This is normal Create React App. And I want to clean it because we don't need all this stuff. First of all, I will remove here app test.js and then app CSS and index CSS, logo, report web vitals and set up tests. So we just need two files, index and app. And inside index, I will remove vitals and then import report vitals, then import index CSS. And now we just have our plain React start with app component inside. Now let's jump inside app.js, and here we don't need this whole markup, so I will remove everything and just write inside hello todo MVC. And now we don't need this class, so we can also remove it. And we don't need these imports on the top. Let's check this in browser. As you can see, I'm reloading the page, and we can see just hello todo MVC message, and our project is ready to be started. Our next step is to bind our CSS from Todo MVC project inside React. So the idea is that we will use the whole CSS that is already prepared for us here in Todo MVC.com. This is why here I will jump in our project and create here 2 new files. So I will link these 2 files in the bottom box below. So here I will create Todo MVC, app CSS, and one more Todo MVC, base.css. And now here I will paste already prepared CSS. So first of all, it will be app. As you can see, this is really a lot. This is like global styles and classes. And secondly, I will copy here our base. So let's jump to base and also paste different classes. As you can see, we don't want to write everything by ourselves, but reuse all these classes inside our components. Now we need to bind them inside our index.js. So here on the top, we can import both. Here is Todo app base CSS, and next is import of Todo MVC app CSS. Now let's look in browser. As you can see, it is looking really different. So we have different color on the background and different text font here, which actually means that we successfully binded this CSS and we can start doing our application. And the first thing that we need to do is, of course, planning. So let's check what we have. This is our project, and we have here different parts. First of all, we have here something like header. This is where we're typing something, and here we can toggle elements. Secondly, we have our main. This is where we're rendering elements, and we have here footer. So here we're rendering the number of items and our filters. Also, maybe we need additional component for single to do here, because there is quite a lot of logic. First of all, we're rendering here, we have remove button, so remove logic, toggle logic, and then inline editing. So I think we need here 4 components: header, main, footer, and single to do. And the next question here, how we will store our data. And yes, this is a small project, and probably we can just inside app store all our data. For example, we have here our app component. We will store them here and just propagate down from app component. But of course, this is not the best and not scalable approach. Much better would be to use create context. So actually, if you don't know, context inside React allow us to share some global things between different components, and it doesn't matter at what level they are. And this is exactly the idea. So we can create something like to-dos context, and we're storing there the array of to-dos, probably our filter and some other methods that we need. Then everywhere we have access to this context, and we can do with data whatever we want. So let's start with our app, because this is our parent component for everything. First of all, here I want to write an arrow function for app, because it is looking better and we don't really need to use functions anywhere. The second part is that inside here in return, we want to render several elements. So we will have here header, main, and footer. And for now, I just want to create, first of all, the div. This will be our wrapper. Here is class name todo app, and this class is important because it comes from that global styles that we used. So here I'm closing our div, and inside this div we will have first component, header, and we will create it in a second. So first of all, here on the top, I want to import our new header component from, and here we will have relative path header. Now let's jump here and create here inside source, probably components, because we don't want to pollute our global namespace. So here I will create components, and inside we have header.js. And here we can write export default, and here will be our header. And now let's create here stateless component just for testing. So here const header, and we just need to return some markup. So here will be return div, and inside we can write header. So our basic component is ready, but here the path is not correct. So here I said that this is just header, but here now we want components/header. Now let's check if it's working. So as you can see here, our header component was successfully rendered. So we have here our shadows and all elements are there. Now we need to start and create really our header component. And the first thing that we have here is of course our input and h1 tag. So let's write here correct markup. We don't need return div, but instead inside return, first of all we have our header with class name header. Now let's close our header, and inside we have two things. First of all h1 tag, and this is our todos. And secondly, actually I think todos is with small letter. Yes, here is small t. And after this we have our input. So here will be input with class name, and class name will be new to do. And we also need here a placeholder, and it will be what needs to be done. Also we need here value on change and so on, but for now I will skip it and just create auto focus, because we want by default to focus in this element when we are loading the page. So let's check this out. We are jumping in our example. As you can see, it is really similar, but it should be a little bit smaller because it is really zoomed. So here we have our H1, and here is our autofocused field. As you can see, after reloading, we're directly focusing inside it, and we can type something. Now we need to store somewhere what we typed here, so we can use it later when we're hitting enter. And for this, of course, we can use useState hooks from React, because we need some kind of state inside our component. So here I am importing useState from React, and now here inside header we can create text and set text. And here we are using useState hook, and default value is empty string. So this is exactly our state for our input. So what we can do here is write our value, and it will be our text, and we also need here a setter on change. So here will be on change event, and here let's create a function change text. And for this we need to create here on the top this function change text. And we're getting here our event, and let's for now just console log our event. So here will be change text, event, target value. And let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page. We need, of course, console to debug. Let's make it bigger. And now here I'm typing something. And as you can see, we're getting this change text console log, which means everything is working correctly. And now we can use here set text to set our state. And inside set text, we must provide event.target.value. So exactly what we read from our input. And we don't need our console anymore. Now we need somehow to trigger our enter. So actually we are typing, this is fine, but when we're hitting enter, we need to react for this. This is why here I want to add on key down event, and here let's create a new event, for example, key down text. And now we need to create this function here. So here we will handle our enter click. Here will be key down text, and we're getting inside our event. But the problem is here when we will console log that we're not having it only with enter, but with every click. So let's check this out. Here I'm reloading the page. After each hitting a button, we're getting this key down text. So actually we need here some logic that we hit it on enter. So we can write here if, and inside event dot, and here we will have key code equals 13, and 13 is our enter. Then we want to console log our key down text. So let's check this. I'm reloading, I'm typing something, we don't have any console log. Then I'm hitting enter, and as you can see, we are getting nice console log key down text. But I really don't like this code. Why? Because here we have a magic number 13 and no developer knows what does it mean. Of course, it is clear key code here and developer can Google what is key code 13, but it's not human friendly. So what we can do is create at least a variable and put inside 13. But actually, if we will use across our application a lot of key codes, it makes sense to write them in additional file. This is why here inside source, I will create helpers folder, and inside let's create keycodes.js. So here we can store all key codes that we need and share them everywhere. This is why here will be export const, and it will be enter code, and here will be 13. So now we know that this is the code of enter button. Now let's jump back in our components header, and on the top import, and here will be enter code from, and here we will have our helpers / key codes. And let's save this and use instead of 13 here enter code. And as you can see, this code is much clearer now. The second thing that I don't like here is this relative path, and this is what we are getting out of the box. So relative paths are normally not good, because first of all I can't really copy paste it because it is relative to some file, which means in other component it won't be like this. So we really want absolute path because it is easier to read, copy paste and replace. And to use this, we can inside create React app say how we want to make our absolute path. And for this, inside our root, we must create new file, jsconfig.json, and inside we want such JSON. So here you have an object, then we have compiler options, and here our base URL is source, and we want to include also source directory. In this case, when we are saving it like this, we can jump in source components headers, and here use instead of this just helpers.keycodes, because in this case this is our root directory source, and we can just import everything like absolute path starting from source. So now let's look on our key down text. So here we have our console log, and actually we don't want event here, but we just need access to our text, and text we changed here when we just typed. So let's check this out. I'm reloading the page, no errors here. I'm typing something and I'm hitting enter. As you can see, we are getting key code text, and this is our text, which means it is working fine, but there are several problems. First of all, we can also have an empty field here and hit enter. This, of course, we don't want to send to our server. This is why here we should not allow empty string. And secondly, if I type something and then I hit it space, we want, of course, to remove spaces on the beginning and at the end. First of all, here I want to create a const to make our code easier to read. So here I want to write isEnter, and now we copy everything from our if, and we name it isEnter, and here I am just pasting this condition. So now our if is better to read. Secondly, we want, of course, to trim our data. This is why here will be new text, and here we have our text.trim. So trim will remove spaces from beginning and from the end. And the last one is that we need to check if it is empty. So here we can name it is text present, and here we are checking new text length bigger than 0. And now if it is an enter and is text present, then we're doing our console log. So at this point, we can communicate with our server, API, or whatever. Also, we want here to change our text to new text because it is trimmed. Now let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page, I'm hitting enter, nothing is there. Now I put several spaces, I'm writing foo, hitting enter, and as you can see, this is a foo string without any spaces. So this is exactly what we wanted. Our next step is to build a place where we can store all our data. And for this we will use React context and of course use context hook. So for this I will jump here in source and create new folder which is called contexts, and here we will have all our contexts across the application. Now let's jump inside and create here a new context, for example todos.js. And now inside we want to create our first context by using React context. So here I want to export const, and here will be our todos context. And to create a context, we need to call create context function. And as you can see here, we are using create context directly from React. So actually todos context will be our global context for us, where we will store all information about our to-dos or, for example, filter. And inside create context, we can provide default value, but in our case, we don't need to. And you will see why in a second. So here is our to-dos context. This is fine, but we also need here a provider. This is why here I will create export const, and here will be to-dos provider. So what we want to do here is to have our children, and just to remind you, we want to wrap all our components or part of our components with the provider, so we have access to our context everywhere. This is why here we need children, and these are all our child components. And here we will have our to-dos context dot provider. Here we can close it, and it will be to-dos context dot provider. As you can see, we didn't use here children, so we need to write it here inside, just like children. Because children is for us our tree of components. So our to-dos provider is ready, but actually it doesn't do anything. So the idea of provider is that we can pass a value inside. And here can be string, object, whatever you want. In our case, we want here to use useReducer. And again, what is useReducer? This is an additional hook in React that allows us to write the same code like we normally do with Redux. So what I want to do here is value equals value, and we want to create it here now. So here we will have value, and it will be the result of useReducer. And useReducer accepts first of all our reducer, and secondly initial state. And we don't need the third parameter. So actually the idea is that we have several things here. First of all, we have here context. This is what we're using to get data from our provider. And in provider, we will wrap everything. And the most important part here is this value, because exactly this value is what we are sharing across all components with the help of the context. And we can use here, for example, string or object, or maybe use state to work with state, but I highly recommend you to use useReducer just because it is more scalable and we can easily make here a huge object of data. The next step here is to create reducer and our initial state. So first of all, let's create our initial state. And you know what we need here. So first of all, we need here the list of to-dos. This is our to-dos that we have. And by default, it is empty array. And secondly, it is our filter. And by default, it is all. Because if we check in the example here, we're reloading the page. And here we have activated all filter. Now we need to create here a reducer. So here will be our reducer. And we're getting here two arguments, first of all our state, and secondly action. And for now we will just return here plain state without any logic. So actually this useReducer is already defined correctly. Here is our reducer, our initial state. Actually here is a typo. It is initial state. And here we're passing value inside our provider. The next step is to wrap all our components with to-dos provider. This is why we exported it here. I want to jump inside our app, and actually we can even do it inside index.js. It doesn't really matter. What we need to do is we need to wrap all our components that we want with our new provider. And in our case, it is to-dos provider. And here I need to close my to-do provider. As you can see, this is a simple additional component that we imported from context/todos. And this is what we just created. Now, because we wrote this line, we can, for example, in our header, get full access to the value inside our context. This is why let's jump back in components header. Now, here on the bottom, we can write, for example, state, comma, and here is dispatch. And here what we're using is useContext, and we must provide inside our to-dos context. And just remember, it is to-dos context, not to-dos provider. This is really important, because we are passing it inside our useContext. And now let's console log what we're getting back. So here I will write, for example, context, comma, state, comma, dispatch. And let's check this out. So I'm jumping in our application, reloading the page, and here what we have. First of all, this is our object. So this is our state that we defined previously inside our context. and dispatch is our function that we can use to change this state. So basically, everything that we do is we combined useReducer and useContext. It is really easy and nice to work with our global state in Redux approach, and useContext helps us to isolate this useReducer inside. But what is interesting, if we will jump into this context here, you can see that we are getting the value as a result from useReducer. And the result from useReducer is an array with two elements, global state and our dispatch method. This is why we are passing it inside, and now all our components have access to global state and also to this dispatch function. This is why here we can see initial state inside our component and use it directly. But actually we don't need to use inside header our state, and we just need dispatch function. This is why for now I will remove the first parameter because we won't use it. What we need now to do here is, instead of this console log key down text, make a dispatch. So here we know that we want to create a new to-do because we hit enter. This is why here we are calling dispatch, and inside we must provide a type, for example add task, and we will also provide here payload, new text. This is our information. So here are several words regarding dispatch. Inside dispatch we are passing an action. This is the part of useReducer hook. And action for us is just an object with type property. And this type must be a string. It doesn't matter if it's lowercase, camel case, whatever you prefer. Most importantly that this type exists, because this is our unique identifier. Also, we can pass other fields inside this action, but I highly recommend you to use always the single field payload, where inside we are passing some information. In this case, we are using dispatch function consistently with the same parameters everywhere. So now what we need to do is react on this dispatch and change our reducer. So let's remove here console log and jump back in our context all to-dos. So here is our reducer, and normally we are writing here switch on action type. In this case we can react to different types. This is why here we have action.type, and we don't need return state here. And first of all we will have here case, and our first case is add task. And we will do here something. For now I will just write return state. And actually I forgot round brackets around action type. So here it is. Now we don't have any errors, and we also need to add here default, and this means that we don't have any case, and we just return here our default state. Now the interesting part is if we will write console log here action, and for example let's look on state and action. And let's check now it in browser. So I'm reloading the page. We're getting some error, header state is not defined. So let's go back in header. Here on line 8, as you can see, I console logged state, but we don't have state anymore. So let's remove this console log completely and reload the page. As you can see, everything is working. We are typing something. I'm hitting enter, and you can see this action. So this is exactly our console log here. So here we have access to our current state, and this is our global state, and this is our action. As you can see, here is type add task and our payload that we want to add in our to-dos array. So now the next question is in what format we want to store all our to-dos. So here we have payload, and this is, for example, text, but we also want to make some unique identifier for each to-do. So we need an ID, and also, as you saw in the example here, we have two states, like is checked or is completed. I think is completed is fine, and it can be true or false. So we need at least to create three properties. So what we want here inside add task is to generate our new task. This is why here I will write const new task, and here will be the object with three fields. First of all, ID. I won't write here anything for now. Then we have our text. This is action.payload, and we have property, for example, is completed, and by default it will be false because we just created this new task. Also, I highly recommend you to always put here brackets for the case. In this case, these properties that we are creating inside, like const, can be reusable inside other cases. In other case, you can't really reuse the same variable everywhere inside switch. So we successfully created our new task, but now the question is what we are passing inside ID. So it should be some unique identifier, and we can generate it, for example, with math random. So we can write here math random and just say to string. This is fine for us, but we can make it better and take only 16 symbols. So this is nice generated ID without any additional library. And for this I will just paste here math random to string 16. So our new task is there, and now instead of return, we want to override our new to-dos. And the important part of Redux or useReducer hook is that we always must return new object. This is why here we need to do it correctly. So here is my new object, and we want to take all properties that we have of the old object. This is why we're using here spread, and we want to override here field to-dos. And for this, I will spread state.todos and merge it with our new task. In this case, we take all properties from state and override here to-dos with the new array. Now, let's check if it's working. But again, to check it, we need inside our header to put back state property from here, but just for testing. And here, let's console log state, state, and check this out. So I'm reloading the page. As you can see, here is our state, so to-dos empty array, filter all. We create foo, and as you can see here, we are getting new state, to-dos, and in our case, we created new element. So we have an object with ID, this is our generated ID, our text that we typed, and is completed false. So we successfully created new to-do inside our global context. Now, let's remove this state from here because we don't need it. And what I don't like is that here we still have our string. It will be really nice to reset it. This is why after our dispatch, we can just say set text empty string. In this case, we will directly remove it. So I am reloading the page. I am typing here something, hitting enter, and as you can see, we have a clean input. And actually, we implemented everything inside our header component that we need. So here we have an input, we have here on changing key down, and when we're hitting enter, we're dispatching a task, and we already created it inside our global context. The next component that we will implement is our main part. And just to remind you, here is the example. So main part is the list of our edit to-dos. And we want to write this code in additional components so we can split the logic, for example, between header and main. So for this, we need first to jump to app.js and here under header, use main. And we don't need to provide anything here, but we need to import this component. So it will be main from components main. Now let's create this component. So inside components, here is main.js, and for now let's just write export default main, and here will be our stateless component. So main, we don't have any parameters, and here I want return, for example, just div with text main inside. So let's save this and check if it's working. As you can see in browser, here is our main section, so now we need to render here our to-dos. Now the question is how we can get here to-dos and how we can filter them. Because if we check the example, here we're rendering to-dos, and when we're changing our filter, the list also changes. So we need to create a property, for example, visible to-dos, where we will calculate, depending on the filter, what to-dos we need to render. And for this, first of all, I want to open header on the right, so we can copy-paste some code. And actually, as you see here, we used here use context to get access to our context. And this is exactly what I want. So here I want to get our state. So here we have state and dispatch, and here we need to use context and to pass inside our to-dos context. So exactly like we did previously in our header component. Now here we can console log our state, and so we have access to all properties inside our global state. So as you can see, when I'm reloading the page, here is console log state, and here we have our to-dos, and every time when we're hitting enter and we have new to-do, this array changes. So actually we have here access to the array of to-dos and to our filter. And now we can write some logic to create new property based on these to-dos and our filter. So if here we have filter that is completed, then we need to filter here only items with is completed true. If here we have active, then here should be is completed false. And if here filter is all, this means that we must return all to-dos. Now let's create this property. So here I want to create new property and let's name it visible to-dos. But actually there will be quite a lot of ifs because we need 3 ifs for our 3 filters. This means it makes sense to create additional function. So here I want to create a function get visible to-dos. And when we are calling this function, we will calculate what to-dos we need to get back. So this is why here get visible to-dos, it is just a function without arguments, and here we must write some logic. And actually I don't want to have here name state because it's too generic. We can say here to-dos state, and I think it is more clear what we are talking about. So first of all, here we will have our to-do state filter, and here the first case it is active. So when our filter is active, we want to return here only our active to-dos. So what we want to do here is to filter to-do state.todos. This is our array of to-dos. And we can use here filter, and here we're getting each to-do, and we can write to-do is completed. And we used here bang, so we have negation. In this case, we will return only non-completed to-dos. Now the next case is else if our filter equals completed. So when it is completed, we want here to return only completed to-dos. So I will copy this filter, and now we have to-do is completed should be true. In this case, we will return only completed to-dos. And the last part is return. We can write here else or simply return afterwards. Here we want to return our to-do state dot to-dos. So here we're returning all to-dos that we have. And now let's console log here visible to-dos to check if it's working. So let's reload the page. As you can see, we don't have any errors. Here is our list. Now I'm typing here new element, I'm hitting enter, and as you can see, here we got new element. Because the filter is all, this is why this element is here. So our visible to-dos is automatically recalculated every single time when our to-do state changes. And this is totally fine for us. Now let's write markup, at least basic, to render this list of visible to-dos. So here I want to return. Here we will have section, and we won't have any class name for now. And inside this section, I want to render UL with class name to-do list. And this will be our list of to-dos. And actually I said that later we want to create additional component for every to-do. But for now, just to see that everything is rendered, I will skip this part. So what we want to do here is to write a map for our visible to-dos. So here is visible to-dos map. We're getting here to-do, and we want to return our markup. And for now, we can simply write here li, and here, of course, we need key. It will be to-do ID. This is our unique identifier. And inside, we want to write to-do.text. So this is our markup. Let's check if it's working. And actually I'm adding an item. We can see our items here inside main. Of course markup is broken, but this is fine for now. We were checking that data is there. The next thing that I want to do is hide this main part if we don't have any to-dos. Actually, the idea is that we need to add here additional class on our section. So what we want here is we want to write class name, and here inside we want to concatenate, first of all, main. This is class name that always there, but we want to render here additional class if we don't have any to-dos. So here I will write no to-dos class. And no to-dos class is just a variable, and we need to calculate it here. So let's create it here on the top. This is no to-dos class, and here we will return empty string or class hidden. if we don't have any to-dos. So here I can write to-do state to-dos, length, and if it equals 0, then we want to return class hidden, and if not, then empty string. In our case, at the beginning here we will have hidden class, and then later it will disappear. So let's check. We're reloading the page, and if we check here our markup, so we have here our div to do app, and here is main hidden. So actually this hidden is this no to-dos class. Now I'm creating foo, for example, and as you can see, we have here only main and no hidden class. So everything is working as expected. Now I want to implement this toggle all button. And actually when we check the example, this toggle all is located in header, but for some reason it is in the markup of main with position absolute. As you can see here, we have this toggle all, and it is on the top because it is position absolute, and here we have top. So actually normally it is in main, but they moved it to the top. Yes, I think this is not the best approach, but as we are using the same CSS, let's implement it also inside main. So for this here inside main markup, first of all, I want to remove console log, and secondly, before our UL, I want to have here input with ID, and here will be toggle all. And we also need here class name, toggle all, and type is checkbox. Now here we need checked, we don't have it yet, and of course on change event, we will add it in a second. So here is our input with checkbox, and here we have label, HTML4, and here we must pass our ID of input, and it will be toggle all. And now inside we will write mark all as completed. So here inside label, mark all as completed. So our input is there, let's check if it's working. As you can see, we don't see this item because our main is not there, but now we're typing something and this item appears now. Now we just need to calculate the value when it is checked and add this change event. So first of all, here I want to create checked, and we need a property for this, so it will be is all to-dos selected. I think this is a good name. And now we need a change event, so on change, we want here to create new function on toggle all to-dos. Now let's create first of all this on toggle all to-dos function. So here on the top, I will just create it and write inside console log, so we know that it works. So here is our on toggle all to-dos. And now the question is how we will calculate is all to-dos selected property. Actually, this is really easy because we have access to our to-do state. So here let's create is all to-do selected, and what I want to do is just use to-do state to do, and here what we want to do is calculate if every element is selected. For this we can use every function, and here we're getting to do, and we need to return our predicate. So here it will be is completed. In this case, if every to-do is completed true, then here we will get true. And we are passing this true inside this checked. So let's reload the page. As you can see, cannot read property every of undefined, because here is not to-do every, but to-dos, because this is an array. As you can see, no errors this time, we are typing something, and we have this checkbox. Now we are clicking on it, and we are getting on toggle all to-dos. And actually it is not black because we don't have checked to-dos. So now we need to implement this on toggle all to-dos. And it also needs to be done inside our to-dos context, because this is for us our business logic service. So this is why here I will write just dispatching of some action. This is why here we have dispatch, and we want to dispatch here with type, for example, toggle all, and here we need a payload, and our payload will be event target checked. And I think here we need to provide our event, so we can read it. In this case, if this is checked, then we want to toggle them all to unchecked and so on. So here is our dispatch, we don't need console log, but now we need to handle this action inside our reducer. So let's go back inside context to-dos, and here we have our switch case. So this is the case for add task. Now we need a new case for our toggle all. So here I want to create a property updated to-dos. And we want to loop through all our to-dos. This is why here will be state to-dos map. And here we get access to every to-do. Now what we want to do is merge all properties of our to-do with isCompleted, which will be new. And isCompleted value we are getting from action.payload. So what we are doing here is we are mapping through all our to-dos and we are updating isCompleted property in every to-do. And we are getting back our list of updated to-dos, so we need to update them inside the state. This is why here I am returning spread of our state, and here is our to-dos, updated to-dos. So we are passing inside to-dos new updated array. Let's check if it's working. So I am reloading the page. Here I am typing something, and as you can see, this is gray. Now I am hitting here, and as you can see, it is black, because we changed here our to-dos array, and now all our to-dos are completed. If you don't believe me, let's console log this. So let's jump back in main, and here we have our to-do state. So we can always console log here our to-do state and check what we have inside. So at the beginning it is empty array to-dos. Now here we have one item to-dos, and this item is completed false. Now we are clicking toggle all, and now we have inside our to-dos one item and this completed is true. This is why this check here is black, which means everything is working as expected. Now let's create our footer component so we can change our filter and see the amount of items. And here is how it will look like. So on the left part we have item left, and actually if we have more items, then we have word items and not item. Also here we have three filters, all active and completed, and we can change between them. Then the amount of items here is also changed based on the filter. So for this, let's first implement our new component. So in source components, we can create new component and name it footer.js. And here I want to export default our footer component. And we need to create here our stateless component. So here we have our footer. And this is just an empty component. And we can return here, for example, div with text footer inside. So now our plain component is ready and we must import it inside our app. So let's jump inside our app, and here under main we can render our footer component. And we also need to register it here, so we're importing here footer from components/footer. And actually here we can use absolute path and not relative. So here I will remove dot and slash, and it will work like previously. Now let's check if it's working. So in browser, let's reload the page. As you can see, here is foo. This is our footer, because here I wrote foo string. Now let's think what properties do we need. So first of all, as you saw in the example here, we have the amount of total items that we have, so the amount that are active. So let's create now here this property. But for this, of course, we need to use useContext because we must get access to our to-dos list. So here we can write that we need our to-do state, and I think dispatch also. And now here we're using our useContext, and we're providing inside our to-dos context. As you can see, I have here auto import. This is why it is already there. If you don't have it, then don't forget to import both of them. So here we have access for our to-do state. So now let's create a new property, active count. And it will be the counter that we will render here on the left. So actually active count is just the length of active items. So here we can write to-do state to-dos. And what we want to do is we want here to get, first of all, filter, because we want to filter and get only active items. So here will be to-do not is completed. In this case, we will get only active items, and at the end we can write length because we need to get the amount of them. And this is our active item. So let's render it in our markup. So first of all, for our markup, we need here footer. Let's close footer. And inside of the footer, we want span with class name. And here we will have to do count. Let's close our span here. And inside, first of all, in strong tag, we want to render our counter. And here we're rendering our active count. So let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page, I don't have anything. Now I'm typing something, and as you can see, here is 1. Now I'm typing once again, and here is 2. So our counter is there, but our markup is completely broken. So first of all, here inside footer, we must add 2 classes. First of all, footer class, and secondly, the class which will be hidden when we don't have any elements. So hidden class we already created inside main, we can write the same code here. So let's name it no-todos class, and here we're doing the same logic, so todos state todos. Here we're checking length equals 0. When it is 0, then we want here to attach hidden class, in other case no class. And now here in footer we can get a class name, and here we want to concatenate strings. So first of all class footer, and the next will be with $no-todos class. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page. Now I'm typing something. As you can see, only after we get the first element, we see our footer. And as you can see, this is a nice markup here with these borders and so on, exactly like in the example here. But the most important for us that when we're reloading the page, we don't see footer until we get todos. Now we need to render our label. So actually here on the right we have items left text, but we can't really write it just like plain text, because when we have only single item, we have here item left, which means this string should also be calculated. This is why let's create here a new property and name it, for example, items left text. And what we want to calculate here is the amount of active count. So here we have active count, and we can use it for our calculation. So here I want to write, so I am concatenating a string item. Then here we have a variable. Actually, if active count equals not equals 1, then we want here to add string s. In other case, we don't get anything here, and now space left. And actually, of course, I understand that writing ternary operator inside string is a bad practice. But to create a new variable here is a little bit verbose, and I think one-liner is not that unreadable. Now let's render this text directly after our strong tag. So here we need items left text. Let's reload our page here and type something. As you can see now we have 1 item left. When we have 2 items, 2 items left. So this is exactly correct approach how we need to do it. But as you can see, we don't have a space between, so maybe we need to put here an BSP space. And if you don't know what is this is a space how we're writing it SP inside HTML. Because inside HTML we can't just write space, it won't be transpiled, but in BSP actually means space. So let's reload the page. As you can see, now it is looking better, because here we have a space between text and the number. Now let's create our filters. So actually here, after our span with todo count, we have the list of filters. So here will be UL with class name filters. Let's close it. And inside we will of course have our list. So here inside in UL, I will create li without any class, and inside we will have a href. And actually we won't use it as an a tag, we will write the prevent default, but we're using here a because the CSS is writing with a tag. This is why here I will write href/, but we actually won't use it. And here inside we can close a and just write all. Now I will copy this li, and here we have text active, and the last one will be our text completed. So let's check if it's working. As you can see, we have this text, but none of them is highlighted with active class. So now we somehow need to highlight them based actually on the active filter. And we have our active filter inside our to-do state. So just to remind you, here is our to-dos. here is our initial state, and here filter is all. And of course we need to change it, and we can use this filter from to-do state to understand what link is active here. So what I want to do here is create additional function where we will get an active class based on the input. So here we can create our get selected class, and inside we want to pass our filter name. So our filter name will be all or active or completed. Now what we want to do inside our function is return a filter. Now inside our getSelected class we need to check if this filter name is active. So here we need to read filter from to-do state. This is why to-do state filter, and we're checking is filter name active. If yes, then we're returning here class selected. If not, then empty string. And now here inside every a tag we can use this class. So here I will write class name, and here we will use our function getSelectedClass, and we must provide a string inside. In this case it will be all. Now I will copy paste it to the next a, and here we have class name, but not all but active, and the last one will be completed. Let's check if it's working. We're reloading the page and we're typing something, and as you can see the first filter is active. This is why we have here border. And what is really nice, here we have this function, which actually means that each time when to-do state filter changes, this function will be automatically called because the component will be re-rendered, and this code will recalculate the active class. The next thing that we need to do is implement our click event. So actually we want on our href add on click event everywhere. So what we want to do here is to call a function. But here we must use an event because we want to write event prevent default in our function. So let's create a function, for example, change filter, and we want to pass inside first of all event and then our string, for example, all. As you can see, this is the same string that we are providing inside getSelectedClass. Now I will copy this on click in every href. So here we have also href, and here is change filter active. Now I will copy it again and add it to completed part. Now let's save this and change it to completed. So now we have this onClick event, and we need to create change filter function. So let's create it here, const change filter, and we know that we're getting event and our filter name. And now let's console log our filter name and do event prevent default. So here will be filter name, and first of all we need event prevent default. Now let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page, typing something, and I'm hitting another filter. As you can see, here is filter name active, which means now it is time to make a dispatch so we can notify our reducer that our user changed the filter. And then inside our reducer we can change the state, and this will notify all components that are subscribed to this change. So here I will remove our console log and use dispatch function. So we want to provide here a new type, and let's name it, for example, change filter, and inside payload we want to provide our filter name. Now let's jump inside our context to-dos, and here we can add new case. So we have here case, and it will be change filter. This is exactly what we just created, and inside we want to update our property filter. This is why here I will just return a new object with spread of state, and we want to override our filter with action.payload. And action.payload will be our new filter. Let's check this out. I'm reloading the page, typing something. Here I'm clicking on active, and as you can see, now our filter is active. Because on click, we dispatch new action. Here is our reducer. We have this logic. This is why our state was changed, and our footer was directly notified because it was re-rendered. So here I can write console log and to-do state, and you can see that we're getting new state after change of reducer. So here I'm clicking on active, and we're getting again to-do state, and here filter is active. So actually our filter is already there. But what is more interesting, our visible to-dos are also working out of the box. Because here when I will click toggle all, we don't see any items, because we are now on the active tab and we don't show completed items. Now I'm jumping to completed and I can see our item. The same with all, because we are on all, we are seeing all our items. So we successfully created our footer component, and now it is time to implement the single to-do. Just to remind you, here inside main, we just rendered this text inside Lee. But in real example, we have quite a lot of logic. First of all, check-in, check-out, then toggle to have editing state, and secondly, we can hit enter and update this to-do, and of course, we have remove to-do. And actually I think that this is quite a lot to write inside main, because here it is going about main section, not about specific to-do. This is why I highly recommend you to create additional components when you see that you are packing quite a lot of stuff in a single component. And here we have our Lee, and actually in this place it makes sense to create new to-do component, and we can pass inside first of all this key, like we did previously, todo.id, and inside we also need to pass our full to-do. And here I will close our to-do for now. And we don't want here Lee anymore, because we will use it inside to-do component. And we also need to import here our new component to-do from components/to-do. Now we just need to create it. So let's create here our to-do component, todo.js, and here I will export default our to-do component, and here let's create to-do, which will be just a stateless component, and inside we can return some markup. And actually here we know that we are getting the full to-do, so I will destructure it like this, and inside we can render here to-do.text. So let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page, typing something, and as you can see it works exactly like previously, because here we see this text, but it is coming from this to-do component. Now let's write the correct markup for this component. So here I will remove our div and just create Lee element like we have previously without any classes for now. And inside Lee we want to have div with class name, and here class name will be view. So this view part is what we see at the beginning. So here is the view part. Now we are double clicking it and we are seeing edit part. This is why inside this div view we have first of all input. This is our toggler on the left. So here we have input class name toggle, and we also have here type checkbox, and I won't add any values for now. The next here we have a label where inside we will have our text. So here I am closing the label and rendering inside to-do.text. And the last one will be a button to remove our to-do. So let's add here a button. We will add an event later, but here we need a class name destroy for the icon. So here I will write destroy, and we don't need any text. Now after this div, we will actually have additional logic for editing. So here we need property, for example, is editing. And if this to-do is editing, then we will render some markup. And actually this markup will be for editing. And we also need to hide this class name view when we're inside editing mode. And we will do it in a second. So inside editing, we want to create an input with class name edit. And I will close it for now. And here, of course, not input, but input. And as you can see, we don't have property is editing here. So the question is how we will get it and how we will store it. Actually, there are several possibilities. As you can see here in the example, when we have two elements and we're activating editing in first of them, then we're double-clicking on the second element, the first is not edited anymore, which actually means that we can't really store is editing inside to-do, because then every to-do can have this is editing true, and we will edit several of them simultaneously. So we actually can store this property inside our reducer, which is completely fine. But I want to show you also that this is not mandatory. If, for example, we want to store some data inside main component, we can do this. This is why in this example, we will store the state inside main here and then pass this information inside every to-do. The question is, what information do we need? So we can't really store isEditing because we need to know what element we're editing now. This is why we need to store something like editing ID and then calculate if we are editing this component or not. So now inside our main TS, let's create one more state. So what we want here is editing ID, and we need here of course set editing ID. And here we're using useState classic React hook, and inside we're passing null as a default parameter. So by default we don't have editing elements, this is why here is null. Now actually we might put editing ID inside every to-do and then compare inside editing ID with current ID. But it doesn't make that much sense because to-do is stateless and we just care inside if it is editing true or not. What we can do here, we can write inside a property isEditing, and this is what we are passing inside to-do. And inside this isEditing, we can do a calculation. So we can compare our editing ID if it equals to our to-do ID. And this means that this calculation, this comparison, we have inside main and not inside to-do itself. And this is much more flexible and correct. And also inside we must provide set editing ID because when we're double clicking inside, we want to call the set editing ID from our child. This is why here I am passing the whole set editing ID inside our to-do. Now let's jump back inside to-do, and now we know that here we are getting this property isEditing and set editing ID. And this editing we already used here, but set editing ID we want to use on double click on this label. The problem is here that we can't really just directly call set editing ID because we must pass ID inside. This is why here we can write on double click, and I want to create here a new function, for example set to do in editing mode. And this will be our local function, which we will create here. So let's create it now. And inside, I just want to call this set editing ID and pass inside to do.id. Actually, we can write this code inside template, but I really like to keep my template as clean as possible. Now let's check if it's working. But for this, we really want to write here console log isEditing, so we can check if this property is correct. So let's reload the page, type something. As you can see, we are getting isEditing false. Now when I am double clicking on this element, we are getting isEditing true, but our markup didn't change. But actually, if we will inspect this element, we will see here on the bottom our input class edit. We just don't have correct classes so that we can see our editing. And for this here inside Lee, we must provide a new class. So here we can create class name and provide here concatenation of several classes. And the first of them will be editing class. So here editing class, and let's create it somewhere on the top. So we need here editing class, and it will be editing when property isEditing is true. So here we will return editing, in other case it will be empty string. So let's reload the page and check if it's working. Here we're double clicking, and as you can see now we don't see view because it was hidden by CSS, and we're seeing our nice input where we can paste some code. The next thing, what we're doing with this editing text. Actually we're typing it now, but we didn't change the state. So what we want to do is save this thing somewhere in state in our to-do, and then when we're hitting enter, we want to close it and update our to-do. This is why we will use exactly the same logic like we did in our header with the input. So here let's add first a value property, and here I want to write edit text, and this edit text will come from our state that we will create in a second. So here we want to create useState and by default store inside to do.text, and then we can change this property just by changing the state. So what I want here is edit text set edit text, and here we have our use state from React, and our initial state will be todo.text. So by default, we just write here inside the value of our to-do. And now edit text is fine, and we also need here change for setter. This is why here we need on change property, and inside we're passing our change edit text or edit input, doesn't really matter. So let's copy this change edit input and create here our const. And what we want to do inside is change our state. This is why here we will have an event, and we can read from event the value and write set edit text, and inside will be event.target.value. Now let's check if it's working. So here I'm reloading the page, no errors, typing something. Now we're double clicking, and as you can see, we directly have the value from our to-do text. And now if I will change it, I have access through the state for this property everywhere. So actually it makes sense now to bind here a key down for enter. Then we can update our to-do when we're hitting enter. So for this here I need not only on change but also on key down, and I want here a new function, for example key down edit input. Let's copy this function and create it here on the top. This is our key down, and we want here also event. So here we can write if event.keyCode equals, and we have already enter code from our helpers, then here we will change to do. So let's write here console log change to do. And here we need access for our edit text. And we also have here our escape. This is why here after I can write if event keyCode, and here I want equals escape code. And actually we don't have escape code. This is why we need to create it in helpers key codes. So here I want to export const escape code, and it will be 27. As you can see, no magic numbers is always good. And now I need to copy this escape code and add it here on the top inside imports. So here is escape, and I will write here console log escape to do. Let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading. Unexpected use of event. So line 14, let's jump there. Here we have event, and of course we named our property not event but just e. We can write here event, doesn't really matter. Let's reload the page, no errors this time, we're typing something. Here we're double clicking for our edit. Now I'm hitting enter. As you can see, we're getting change to do. If I'm hitting escape, I'm having escape to do, which means we successfully checked these two keys, and now we need to make a reaction for them. So first of all, let's cover escape because it is easier. We need to restore here a value inside our editing state. This is why here we can write set edit text, and here will be todo.text. So we are reverting everything back. And the second is set editing ID. We must set it to null because we don't make an editing anymore. Let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page, typing something, editing. Now I really need to have here focus, in other case it won't work, and I'm hitting here escape. As you can see, we have the old value and we are not in editing mode anymore. Now let's implement this change to do part. So first of all, what we must do here is make our dispatch. So we really need a dispatch for our reducer. So here we need two things. First of all, our type, it will be changed to do, and secondly, a payload. And inside payload here we must provide an object because we need to provide here several fields. And first of all, here will be ID, this is to do ID. We must know what ID we want to update. And secondly, here will be text from event.target.value. So we're reading the value of our input. And now we successfully dispatched it, but we want to close editing mode. This is why after this we need to write set editing ID null. Now let's implement our change of to do inside our reducer. So let's jump to context to do's, and here we need one more case, and it will be change to do. What we want to do now here is map through all our elements, and when we're finding our to-do by ID, then we want to update it. So here I will create updated to-dos, and we want our state.todos, and we're mapping through them. Here we have access to every to-do, and first of all inside we have a check. If our todo.id equals action.payload.id, so this ID that we want to change, then we do here our magic. In other case, we are just returning the to-do. Now what we want to do inside is just update the text. This is why here I have a spread, and I want to update my to-do, and inside I want to update text, and text here will be action.payload.text. This is what we passed inside. So here we successfully updated our to-dos, but we must update the whole state. So here I am merging the whole state with property to-dos, and here I have our updated to-dos. So let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page. As you can see, this page is not defined. I think we didn't import it here. So let's go to the top. As you can see here, we don't use context at all. So we really need here import, and we don't need state. This is why I am omitting the first parameter. We use here only dispatch, and as always use context, and inside we are passing our to-dos context. And don't forget that you must import use context and our to-dos context. Now we have dispatch, and we can check if it's working. So here is our to-do. I'm double clicking, I'm changing it, and I'm hitting enter. As you can see, our element here is re-rendered correctly because we updated our reducer, which actually means our state and our to-dos in state are in sync with the whole application. The next thing that we need to implement is this toggle to-do on the left. Yes, we are changing here our checkbox, but we need a default value, and we also need some styling. So first of all, let's start with styling. Actually, we need here an additional class so we can highlight that this is completed to do. This is why here I'm concatenating several classes. And here we will have one more class, completed class. And now we need here to write this logic. So actually we have here completed class, and here we want to check if our to-do dot is completed is in true. So we're checking if it is in true, then we have here completed class. If not, then just an empty string. Now when we're reloading the page, typing something and hitting checkbox, actually we didn't change it because here we don't have any state. So we need to go inside our input here and use a value. And we can read the value directly from todo.isCompleted. But this is also not enough, because this is the default value, and by default it is false, which actually means we need to change the state. This is why here I want onChange event, and inside our onChange I need a new function, and let's name it, for example, toggle to do. So let's create now this function somewhere on the top, for example here, and what we want to do inside is dispatch a new action to toggle our to do. So here I will write dispatch, and here we want to create a type, for example, toggle to do, and we need here a payload. And inside payload we must provide to do ID, so we know what ID we must toggle. Now let's implement this logic inside reducer. So I will jump inside context, and as you can see here we have changed to do. Actually, our toggle to do is almost the same. This is why I will copy paste the whole case and paste it here. Now we need to rename it to case toggle to do. And here we want to update our to-dos, and we need to map through them. So we're mapping through our to-dos, and here we have exactly the same logic, but we have this ID directly inside action.payload. So here we can remove our ID. And what we want to do here is change our isCompleted. So here we can write isCompleted, and we just want to inverse it here. So we can write to do isCompleted with the bang. Now let's check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page, typing something and hitting here check. As you can see now, it was re-rendered just because we changed our state, because without the change of the state, our component won't be notified that we changed something. And actually even toggle all is working now because our element is also highlighted. Now let's implement removing of to-do. And actually it will be really similar. We just need here a new event for our button. So here we have this button and we want here a new function. So let's create onClick and we want here our remove to do. And inside this remove to do, we want to dispatch something. This is why here will be remove to do. And actually we can just copy paste this dispatch because it will be the same. So we want to dispatch with type remove to do, and as a payload we are passing to do ID because we want to remove by ID. Now let's jump back inside our context and here create new case. So here we will have new case remove to do, and inside we want to filter and reject this ID. This is why here I want to create updated to-dos, and we want here state to-dos, and here we must use filter, and we have access for to-do, and we want to check that this todo.id does not equal our payload, so action.payload. If it does not equal, this means that we don't need to reject it. Now we want to return here our state and merge it with our to-dos. This is why here I am writing to-dos update to-dos. Let's check if it's working. Here I am typing something, this is our element. I am clicking on the cross and we don't see anything because our element was removed. If we have two of them, for example bar and foo, by removing bar here, we just see the single element, which means it is working correctly. And actually we implemented the whole to-do component, but there is one small thing that I don't like. When we are double clicking here, as you can see, we don't have direct focus inside this input, and this is not a good UI. This is why it will be really nice if we will implement it so that when we are setting the edit mode, we are focusing directly in this element. And for this, we must use a reference for the DOM element. So here what we want to do is create edit input element. And here we will store our reference with the help of use ref hook. And inside we will pass null because by default it's not there. Now we need to attach this edit input element for our editing input. So here we can write ref edit input element. Now we have reference of this input and we can use the focus. The question is at what point? Actually every time when we have a render and after this render is editing property is in true. So what I can write here is just before our return use effect, and we're triggering here use effect because it will happen after every render. And inside this use effect we can write if we have is editing, then we do our focus, because only after this is true we want to focus on our input. So here I want to write edit input element, this is our reference, dot current, don't forget current because we have the reference inside current, dot focus. And in this case we will focus only after is editing true, and we won't do anything when we simply change the state. So let's check if it's working. I'm reloading the page. Here is our foo element. I'm double clicking, and as you can see I have direct focus, so this is really nice UI. So we successfully implemented together our to-do MVC with usage of React hooks. And as you can see, it was really small project, but we made it scalable and we implemented the whole architecture correctly. And if this project was too easy for you, I have the full advanced React hooks course where we are building the real application from start to the end, and it is going 10 hours. And if you are interested, I will link it down in the description box below, so don't forget to check it out. And if you like this video and you want more content like this, don't forget to put thumbs up to support me and subscribe to the channel. And as always, happy coding!